I guess to me fun bit now. This is the bit, to be honest, I've been looking forward to this all day after Andy's told me how good the edges have been fishing on here. So what I want to do, I've picked one side to fish down the edge. I'm definitely not a fan of having two margin pegs. I like having one, and I like to really concentrate on what's going on that peg. I find I can get a little bit lost if I've got two shoals of fish and I'm rotating them. So sticking with one, personally for me, that's the way to go. Also, a little tip worth mentioning as well is whatever, me being a right-hander, it's always better for me fishing to my left. A lot more comfortable sitting with my pole across my body. I just feel a lot more comfortable. I can steady my pole a lot more than if I was fished to my right and I've got to twist all my body around. Of course, for your left-hander, the opposite way is a lot easier as well. So for me, I've picked my left-hand margin. I've picked in front of the peg, which here at Cudmore is really, really important because we've got big weed beds in between the pegs. So by getting in front of the pallet, which is a very, very popular thing at most commercials, it's where the fish, they sort of associate with getting fed. A lot of bait gets spilt there. I also find it's a really good area because you keep nets clean, that area. There's often not much debris short in front of the pegs because the net's going in and out all the time can make it really nice and clean. A perfect bottom to fish on, to be honest. So that's what I've gone with over there. Bait-wise, say all the hard pellets have been discarded, and I've mixed up my ground bait. I've mixed that really, really, really wet, so it's on the verge of being spoiled. It's got loads of lumps in there, but I'm not bothered. I'm feeding it in big lumps, so I'm not bothered about riddling it, making it all fancy. Not for me edge fishing. But I've mixed half a bag of red stuff and half a bag of green stuff, and it's given me this lovely dark colour that's going to match perfectly with the bottom on here. Not I'm going to feed a lot of ground baits, but I need a little bit to kickstart it. And secondly, I've got my micro pellets. I'm going to talk about them a little bit more when I start feeding, when I'm actually fishing and feeding. But these are 50-50, my Bagham's 2mm micro pellets and Copham's pellets. Really, really important that I feed both. But I'll touch on that again in a minute. And now before I go through rigs, what I want to quickly do is talk about me thinking of why I feed my margins or how much I feed them with and why. Yeah, because I've genuinely not fed any bait down there yet. Nothing's gone down the edge whatsoever. So all I'm going to feed is literally one little pile, if you see there, of micros and ground bait mix. We'll put a little bit more ground bait in that. So not a lot of bait at all, tiny little ball sort of thing if I were to squish it up. And I'm just going to put that in loose. So I've plumbed down there, I've probably got, what have I got? I've got about 15 inch, which is perfect depth. That loose ground bait's going to go down. And it's going to go down because it's quite heavy, quite in a nice, reasonably tight pile. It'll probably go down in probably a 12-inch pile when I put that in. So before I go through my rigs, I'm going to give them the first little hit. Just where I plumbed up and see how quickly they come in on this. I'll put my first little pile in. So not a lot of bait at all. I genuinely, if I could help it, I would not feed with that big pot again. And so today what I haven't got is any other anglers fishing down the edge to watch to see if the fish are coming in the edge, which they naturally do at a certain time during the day at a lot of venues. In that case, I wouldn't have even bothered feeding like that. I'd have gone straight in with my little pot and fished. Yeah, I'm a big believer in not using massive, massive amounts of bait to draw fish into my edges unless it's required, which on some massive, great big venues it is. But these smaller venues where there's always a lot of carp close by to you, you often only need a tiny little bit of bait to get that one bite. And what that does by feeding just a tiny little pile of bait, there's no sort of leftovers once you've caught a fish, and the actual footprint of your bait on the bottom is a lot smaller. So the fish can come in, they're much more likely to find my bait because they're not feeding over a great big pile of bait if I put 6 or 7 big pots in, but they're much more likely to find my bait, and I just get a cleaner bite. You can control your peg so much nicer, which hopefully what we'll be able to do down there by feeding the minimal bait all the time. The more bait you put in, the more options they've got, and the more they stir it all over the place. Right, so rigs wise, or rig, so I keep things ridiculously simple when it comes to me edge fishing. I've tried all sorts of fancy little girly rigs and all sorts of things for catching fish down the edge, and ultimately I come back to the same thing all the time. What I'm after is a really, really heavy positive in that, but I mean it's a great big bulk really close to my hook. In that case I've got a 3.5-inch hook length, and I've got my bulk right on top of it. Great big bulk of 6 number 8 shot. What that's going to do is keep my bait perfectly in position. It's going to get bashed about because there's a lot of big fish down the edges when they're coming in, but it's going to return to fishing position as quickly as possible. It also makes it very distinguishable between my liners and my bites because I've got such a big, heavy amount of shot close to the hook. When the fish dislodges that through sucking my bait in, you get a really fast bite, whereas a liner can be a nice little slow pulley all over the place thing. But so in that case, these are 4x14s. It's taken quite a bit of shot that for a 4x14s, but I've just cut it down a nice wire stem round body. Again, just to aid stability to help keep it over that pile. And line-wise, everything's just really robust. I've got 0.19 mainline to an 0.16 hook length, so nice and positive, and I finished it with a 16 hook. So I've got plenty of kit that I can pull. I've also matched my elastic just about right to it. I put a lovely soft green stuff in, which is our green twin core, which is, I think it's 10 to 12, which is just going to get them in quick. You know what I mean? It's nice and soft, so I'm not going to bump any smaller fish, some skimmers and F1s, but it gets the job done as well. I can really power that up and get the fish in as quickly as possible. So that's had long enough to settle. I can't see a fish on that. No, I can't see any down here, but hopefully there'll be a fish within the vicinity now. So I've put a little pile of bait in, and I've give it, normally in a match I'd probably give it 10 minutes. I'm probably going out a little bit quick, but 10 minutes, and I'll go in there with another little pile of feed. Assuming my initial lot's been eaten, I'll go in there with another little pile, and hopefully they'll come straight in, and I'll get a bite as quickly as possible, but we'll see what happens. Right, so just before I go in there and hopefully nab a great big one, first I'm going to go through my hook bait. So for me, I'm going with a piece of sweet corn to start with. I want something non-selective, I want something selective, but I want something heavy as well that keeps on the bottom. Like me and Andy mentioned before, it's just about confidence. So for me, a great big lump of corn, that's going to stay right on the bottom, or help to stay on the bottom, over the top of my pile. So alternatively, if there's a few smaller fish there, some skimmers, whatever else, I can swap to an expander. But to begin with, so I want something that's not going to waft about, something that's going to sit on the bottom, and the fish are going to find it. Right, now for me feed, so I've only got a little medium pole mantle pot on. Nothing fancy, I'm only going to feed a very small amount of bait every go. Because I've got 50-50 Skrettins and Coppens pellets that I've softened up for feed. And I'm literally going to nearly fill that pot, but then compress it down into a nice pellet of pellets. So they're nicely condensed into my pot now, and they're going to stay there lovely all the way out to my peg. By using the two, although the reason I use the two, what it helps do is the Skrettins pellets are notoriously light and fluffy, and they split up very, very quickly. So if I were to feed just Skrettins pellets, they go in and they tend to mushroom out your pot like a little mushroom cloud in the water. So it increases that footprint that I'm talking about of the area that the bait spreads on the bottom. Whereas by adding Coppens pellets to it, they act as much more of a binding agent. So they actually release my pellets, while my pellets stay in a much tighter pile all the way to the bottom and sit on the bottom in probably 2 or 3 inch square, which of course makes it a much smaller area for the fish to move about on. And as long as I can put my little bait right over the top of it, it increases my chance of a bite, because there's less mouthfuls for the fish, if you like. So I'm going to whiz this over there, and I'm going to have one. Right, so I've got my micros nicely compressed into that pot. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to line up with the last lot of feed I just put in, just in case there's any left. What I've actually put, I put a bit of tape on my pole, just so I know I'm putting my bait in exactly the same place every time. I've also got a little marker on the far bank or against that weed bed that I'm using. So I'm just going to put those pellets in there. See how they leave my pot ever so quickly, but they also stay in a tight pile. That's why I've got the 2 types of pellets. They really help them to bind together and keep them nice and tight. And what it's done pretty much, because I've put such a small area to feed, it means that any fish that are in the vicinity, they home in on it really, really, really quickly. So, and give me a ridiculously quick bite. So this one, I don't think it's the intended quaddy, but it's a fish all the same, which I'm well happy with. This is a big skimmer down the edge. So it's not the right fish, so hopefully we'll catch a carp in a minute, but it just shows how quickly putting that pile in, because there's very little bait in the area, and it means that they home straight in on it. So you get a bite ever so quickly, because it's the only substantial amount of feed, I suppose, for them to find and it be worthwhile eating. As long as I put my bait right on top of that little pile, it's always going to result in a quick bite as long as there's a fish there. And now it's simply a case of repeating that every single cast while I'm catching fish. So the only time I'd introduce any more bait with a big pot would be if the peg fizzles out and the fish stop coming in. Then it could be a case of putting half a pot of ground bait in and a few micros, just leaving it for 15-20 minutes, let them settle again, and then repeat the same thing. So the big pot very, very rarely gets used. Same again, little tiny pile, put him in my peg, just give it a second just to make sure it gets to the bottom. Now I'm going to put that rig right over the top of it, and we'll see how quickly they're coming into the peg. So that lovely stable rig keeps my bait perfectly where I need it to be. I mean, it'd be possibly far too heavy for that depth, but for this style of fishing, for me, there's no other way of presenting my bait now. It's just great big, heavy rig, hold it in place. So the bites, you'll see from that last bite I had, they're just brilliant. Because of dislodging such a heavy amount of shot, when they suck that corn or whatever your hook bait is in, it's just the perfect trap as far as I'm concerned. There doesn't seem to be anything coming in my peg that time. So nice and patient, as long as I feel that trap's in place. The light's going a bit funny down there. Yeah, as long as I feel that trap's in place, then there's no need to do anything. I can just sit nice and patiently. So if I were to miss a bite, or a fish were to spook out my peg and cause a great big swirl or something like that, I felt that the trap had been dispersed. A bite. I think that was a bite. It's a bit excitable. Then I may feed again. But as long as I feel like my pile's still intact on the bottom, if you like, then I'm happy to continue fishing over it. We'll see what happens. So I missed the bite then, but I didn't see. I mean, nothing happened. The fish didn't spook out my peg. I didn't see a big swirl. So I'm fairly happy that there's still a little bit of bait in my spot. So I'm just going to give it another 60 seconds. See if I get a bite. And if not, it won't bother me one little bit to whiz back in again, feed and replace that pile. I'm striking at some funny bites here. The light's just a little bit funny down there. It's gone better now that ripple stopped. So it's really important not to strike at the wrong bites. So I don't think they've been carp in my peg yet. Not the bites that I've had, because I'd have seen them. I'd have seen a few swirls before I had the bite, possibly. And I'd imagine they'd have spooked out the peg with those 2 Zorro strikes that I've given it. So I think that the small fish is a carp on my peg then. There was carp a little bit closer in, and there's a swirl right over my bait now. So by sitting there nice and patient, hopefully I'll find my bait. I think he's gone a bit further up though. Come on, Carpy. Definitely shouldn't have struck at that. One last go. I'm still happy that pile's there. There's been no great big swirl or anything over the top of it. There's a tail waving next to my float, but the fish has actually got his head against the bank. So he's miles away from my bait. Here we go, that was a proper bite. That's what we were waiting for. Being nice and patient. There's no panic of lumping more bait in to try and get bites quicker. It's not going to happen. All it's going to do is disperse the fish over a wider area. Simply by being patient, waiting for one to stumble across my little pile with my hook bait sat on top. Pretty much I can put one of these in the net every 5 or 10 minutes, which would result in a lovely finish to any match. This green stuff proper gets them to the net as quickly as possible. The proper fighting today. Too much stick. Lovely. I like that. For me, that's about as easy as it gets when it comes to margin fishing. It can't be kept more simpler, and I definitely don't believe there's any other way of controlling your peg better than, say, by just leaving that big pot in the bag, unless all else has failed. I say just stick to them little piles and getting the job done.